it seems as if we had before us a mere emptiness. When we try to introspect the sensation of blue, all we see is the blue out there in the world. The other element is as if it were diaphanous. And that's the bit that people often quote, although in the next sentence, Moore goes on to really take quite a lot of it back. He says, it can be distinguished if we look attentively enough, and if we know that there's something to look for. So I suppose the model here is something like, I don't know, smudged glass, or something. Usually you just look through the window and you see the trees on the other side, but if you want to and you attend just right, you can kind of retract your attention just far and see the glass and the smudges on it, and on you go. Difficult, but not impossible. Then there's the quote from Evans, who has been referred to as an advocate of transparency models, but now in the domain of thinking and believing. In making a self-ascription of belief, one's eyes are directed outward upon the world. If someone asks me, do you think there's going to be a Third World War? I'll attend in answering him to precisely the same outward phenomena as I would attend to if I were answering the question, will there be a Third World War? Now, Evans doesn't actually say anything about transparency or obscurity per se. Really here the central theme is that to attend to the belief, to gain knowledge of the mental state, you have to engage in a process of outward attention. So people sometimes talk about, seeing in by looking out. Fred Dresky has used a phrase like that. The method that we use to gain knowledge of the inner thing is somehow intimately involves the same kind of processes that we would use to gain knowledge of the thing in the world. And this is a point which I think plausibly applies just as much to experience as to belief. It does seem that when I gain knowledge, I'm having a certain experience of green now, as in the green sign up there. Attention to the greenness out there is centrally involved. So a number of different things here. Again, you don't think you get... It's interesting that from none of these do you really get a full, certainly from the last two, do you get vindication of the the strong idea that there's no experience, say, of thinking, of seeing, or of consciousness. Moore makes a observation about the difficulty of attending to these things, and Evans makes an observation about the method by which we gain knowledge of one's thinking or of one's believing. There's not the strong claim that we suggested way back that there's no experiences of one's mental states. Maybe you get something like that with Hume. Okay, so with these, let's think about this strong claim. We have no experience of the relevant mental states, or no experience of the self. Now I think this claim, we have no experiences of all of our mental states. Awareness and experience of our mental states played a role, a pretty central role in Fred's talk, and the corresponding claim about the self played a role in Jesse's talk. I mean, you can see this kind of claim as generating, at the very least, a challenge to certain forms of self-knowledge and self-awareness. And I think this dialectic, where you've got, on the one hand, a transparency observation, and on the second hand, a challenge that raises to self-knowledge and self-awareness, has played a central role in a number of cases. Here I'll initially focus on one case, the case of knowledge and experience of mental states. The case where the object is mental states and the relevant relation is knowledge. Although we'll see that other cases arise too. Well, you can turn this pretty directly into an argument. Premise one, we have no experience of our mental state. This is a strong version of the Moorean point, the kind of thing Fred was saying. You experience the blueness, maybe you consciously think about the Third World War, but you don't experience the experiencing of the blueness. You're not aware of that in experience. You don't experience the thinking about the Third World War. You're not aware of the thinking in experience. So that's premise one. Premise two, if we have no experience of our mental states, then we have no introspective knowledge of our mental states. Now, Fred didn't say anything as crude or as crass as that, but you can see part of what's going on in the paper as a way of making that kind of a premise at least plausible. If we didn't have that experience, then there'd be a relatively straightforward route to this introspective knowledge. In the absence of that kind of experience, we're just aware of the things outward the things out there in the world, hard to see how you get that knowledge. Put those two premises together, you get conclusion 3. We have no introspective knowledge of our mental states. A conclusion that Fred at least came, down fairly close to endorsing. So that's the challenge in the case of self-knowledge of our mental states. You'll get different versions of this for other things. I think, for example, sticking with mental states, you get an analogous challenge for concepts of our mental states, introspective concepts of our mental states, and for introspective beliefs about our mental states. So just to go back here, you just have, you change premise 2 to, if we have no experience of our mental states, we don't have any concepts of them either. And here the thought is that in order to have concepts of our mental states, we'd have to be aware, we'd have to be experientially aware of them. We'd have to, have experiences of them in that sense. In order to have beliefs about them, we'd have to have some sort of experience of them to ground the concepts and the beliefs. With that premise 2, you then get a challenge to the very possibility of concepts or beliefs about our mental states. Likewise, you could in principle generate versions of this transparency challenge for the self. So just replace mental states here by the self. We have no experience of ourselves. That's the Humean point. Second, if we have no experience of ourselves, we have no introspective knowledge of ourselves. And this, again, is a version of the thought that, the most plausible route to that kind of knowledge would be grounded in some sort of experience of ourselves. In the absence of that, it's at least very hard to see how this would work. 3, we have no introspective knowledge of ourselves. And you could also come up with versions of that for concepts of ourselves, for beliefs about ourselves, and on you go. Now, not many people are going to accept the conclusion of those arguments, but I think you can see all of these arguments as posing an interesting challenge. If you're not going to accept the conclusion, you need to deny one of the premises. You need to figure out where things go wrong. I said not many people accept the conclusions of the argument, but it may be that some do. As I said, Fred at least comes close. Fred certainly takes the conclusion seriously. So option 1, in responding to these arguments, what can you do? You can accept the conclusion, or you can deny one of the premises. That gives you basically 3 strategies. The first strategy will be to accept both premises, and so accept the skeptical conclusion. In the first case, that we have no introspective self-knowledge. And Fred, at least at the end of this paper, takes this possibility very seriously. I find this consequence pretty hard to accept, as do most people. The existence of introspective knowledge that I'm conscious, that I'm now thinking, that I'm now a little bit thirsty, and so on. Is a bit of a datum. Okay, it's true that I got there by looking at the bottle of water, but I didn't say that looking out can't play a role on the sea again. So I take this to be a bit, this is just me speaking, but I take this to be a reductio of the combination of 1 and 2. You better not accept both 1 and 2 unless you want to go this way. Put it this way, unless it turns out there are really, really serious problems. They'd have to turn out to be really, really serious problems with both 1 and 2 in order to accept 3. Because there are, I think, pretty clearly very serious prima facie reasons to accept 3. So for me, that gives pretty serious reasons to go back and re-examine 1 and 2. And I think the same is true for most people. Now, the second option is to deny premise 2. Just to get back here. If we have no experience of our mental states, we have no introspective knowledge of our mental states. As introspective knowledge of our mental states would require experience of them. Awareness and experience of them. So some deny premise 2, embracing what we might think of as non-experiential models of self-knowledge. The basic divide here is between models of knowledge of one's mental states and of oneself that give a central, crucial role to experience, to awareness within experience of those mental states or of oneself, and models that don't. Ones that don't are called non-experiential models. I think Alex's talk this morning can be seen as a paradigm case of a non-experiential model. A model that he argued can yield introspective knowledge of what we're believing and what we're desiring, giving no particular role to experience of believing or desiring. And for all Alex said, there may well be no such experience of believing or of desiring. Instead, there's this